Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to this edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek. I wanted to cover a couple of things with you guys and bring you up to date. The Pest Geek Academy is coming along. We're still recording classes. We're still dealing with quizzes and setting up that infrastructure. So bigger undertaking than I thought, but that is coming. So stay tuned to that. You can always find out what is happening with that class or the lessons that we're putting up at the Academy by going to pestgeekpodcast.com and going to training. There you will find the Academy that is being built. So letting you know about that. Also, hey, if you guys appreciate what we're doing here, you appreciate what I'm doing, what Steven Van Tassel is doing, trying to bring you the best free content and be the world's #1 pest control training podcast that is free. If you enjoy it, hey, would you consider donating, supporting us? It's easy. Just go to pestgeekpodcast.com, hit the donate button, and whatever you feel that this podcast is worth to you, go ahead and support us. We would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Guys, if your phone is not ringing, if you've been on the fence about getting maybe an 800 toll-free number, or maybe getting a vanity number, you're like 1888 got bugs, or an easy to remember number like 1-800-600-500 to increase the ease of your customers getting a hold of you, contacting you, this is the time you might want to do this. Now, Ring Boost, which is one of the nation's largest provider of these services, came to us and said, hey, would you be interested in promoting this on your podcast? And of course I said yes. What he said is, hey, look, we're going to do a 15%, and if we're going to give you a custom page. So we've got our own page, which is, I'll tell you right now, ringboost.com/pest. If you put in pest 15 at checkout, you look for your number, get the number because you can do this right on their website. If you use our link and the promo code, which is pest 15, hey guys, you get 15% off. You can do the search right there, buy it right there online. And without further ado, and here is Steven Van Tassel with today's topic.
Thanks, Frank. Steven Van Tassel here, wildlife control consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife. Wanted to talk today about trap molestation. Yeah, it's kind of a strange phrase to be sure. But what I'm referring to is when your traps just are being disturbed. So, because that can really be a significant problem for people in wildlife control, because if your traps are not working, then you're not going to be catching the animals that you need to catch. You're not going to be making money. And time is money, and you're going to be spending more time on site. And so a job that may have only taken 5 days is now covering 2 weekends. And, it just goes on and on and on. The customer can suffer more damage. It can be harder for you to set up elsewhere. So when your traps are molested, your traps are bothered, when your traps are disturbed, it can be a significant hassle for your business and your client as well. So this is a reality that we have to accept. It's certainly something that people in the pest control world have to struggle with as well, in terms of bait stations not being not being left alone, or maybe their glue boards are being moved around. It can certainly happen in kitchens and in warehouses and that sort of thing. But I think it's different for wildlife control operators simply because a lot of our stuff is big. It's much easier to see. People are fascinated with animals. I call it the Disneyfication of America, where it's not the raccoon, it's Rocky the raccoon, right? So people think they have a better relationship with their pets, for instance, than they do their own children. In fact, you even have people calling their pets their fur children, which is truly frightening in terms of what is happening to our culture. But that's more of a human dimensions talk, and so I'm not going to go down too far that route here. But the point is people often don't leave our stuff alone. So let's break this down a little bit. What do I mean by trap molestation? So as I said earlier, trap molestation is when your traps are disturbed. Now, there are three basic sources of problems that cause your traps to be disturbed. And so let's break that down a little bit. First, we have to think about that weather. Weather can be an issue for your disturbing your traps. So if your trap is buried in snow, it's not the trap hasn't been disturbed in the sense it hasn't been moved from the location, but it's now no longer functioning. That's a problem, right? I'm not talking about weather issues today. But a weather can also be something where, you have a trap maybe on the roof, and maybe the roof was a little bit bigger than you thought, and you had a heavy snowfall, and all of a sudden you also had a little bit of a thaw, and then the snow slid off the roof and it took your trap with it because you didn't anchor it good enough. Or the wind blew it off. That's a weather molestation, right? So that's clearly a problem, right? So I don't want to ignore that particular issue, but that's not what I want to talk about today. So those are weather issues. You also have molestation by animals, like a dog coming up to your trap and rolling it over. Those of you in bear country certainly have some challenges with bears disturbing equipment. Non-target animals can be involved, although that's typically not understood as molestation in the sense, but the idea is your trap's no longer functioning the way that it should. That's more of an animal element there. So that's not something I'm going to be talking about today either. I think when most people think about trap molestation, they think about people disturbing your equipment. And that's what I want to talk about today. Trap molestation as an individual or individuals mucking around, screwing around with your equipment, right? Your traps. And so that can occur in a variety of ways, for instance. So you can have a person who just hates trappers. This is an individual who just, maybe they're a member of PETA, maybe they're a member of various other animal rights protest industry groups, and they just think that you do not have the right to trap animals because that animal deserves to be free, and you need to leave this place alone. Fur trappers have to deal with this, with people going out and springing their traps or stealing the traps, or otherwise making it difficult for those trappers to do their job of releasing animals that have been caught in those traps. So molestation can occur in a variety of ways. It could be that the trap is just simply sprung. So every time you come back to check your equipment, you're wondering, the client hasn't told you caught anything. The client's looking out, checking your trap. No, nothing's caught today. And the clients, as much as you try, clients don't. Clients are busy. They don't care. That's why they hired you. They don't want to be dealing with it, right? So are they really looking to see if the door of the trap is still open? And a lot of times they're not. So, you're going several days and you're like, gosh, why am I not catching anything here? You start maybe questioning yourself, and, you just set at the right location. Is the animal dead? And so you start going through all of these different things in your head, and you show up at the location and your traps are all sprung. Well, yeah, you haven't caught anything because the traps are closed. I'm obviously referring here mostly to cage and box traps, right? So that's clearly a problem. So let's do a side note here and just simply say, if you have your client checking your traps, then make sure you have a system so that the client can actually easily tell whether the door to the trap is closed or not. And that if it's a cage, they're not just simply looking to see if an animal's in the cage. Now, I always tell people to cover their traps at least 50% of the length. If you've been listening to my podcast, that's just something I bang a drum on all the time. But I know a lot of people don't do it, right? So if you don't do that, and the person is just looking at the cage and say, yep, cage is empty, nothing caught. But if they don't look carefully enough, because sometimes the angle of the trap is such, it's very difficult to tell whether the door is closed, particularly doors that are just wire doors, and so it looks like the rest of the cage, right? So, and again, people aren't looking, and a lot of people, have worse vision than you think they do. I mean, I'm amazed at, a lot of times how many, people don't see nails on the highway because they're distracted and a whole host of other things. So are they really paying attention to your equipment? And I would just simply say, don't assume that they are. So you got to make it idiot-proof. Okay? But some people do is they take some, what's the word I'm looking for? Some ribbon, maybe some blaze orange type ribbon, and place it on the door. So then they would say, look, when the ribbon is in line with the top of the trap, the door is open. When the ribbon is in line with the bottom of the trap, the door is closed. Right? So you may have a different method. And I'm not here to tell you what method you should use. I'm just saying that is certainly going to be a problem. It's going to cost you money. You need to be sure that when your client's checking your traps, that they make sure that the trap is not only empty in the sense that there's no animal in there, but also that the trap is still available to catch something, right? So you have these animal rights people or animal welfare type people, just kicking the trap and the door closes. Okay, so that's one type of molestation. Another type of molestation is you've caught something and the person says, well, it looked like the animal was hungry and it took a while for you to get there and I wanted to start feeding it. So they're actually trying to feed the animal that's in your cage. And that opens up a whole world of problems for you, right? As an owner. Now you have people that are getting up close and personal to that animal. Could be trying to give it water. They could be trying to give it food. They may be trying to take pictures and selfies with themselves with it. And what do you think the chances are that they might get scratched or they could get bitten as they're trying to hand feed this thing? It may not be enough to just simply stand above the cage and drop the food through the cage. They may want to, can the raccoon grab it, right? I mean, never underestimate people's fascination with animals. And again, we talk about this Disneyfication of America where people think that they can talk to animals and commune with animals. And so you see these memes on Facebook and this is really taking over the country. And so here in Montana, if you didn't know, I live in Montana. I mean, there's stories regularly about people doing stupid stuff in Yellowstone. I mean, literally stupid stuff. I mean, where one guy got in trouble for, he was going through Yellowstone, he saw a young buffalo and thought it was cold and put it inside of his minivan. I mean, really? So where people want to get, how close can I get to that elk? And then they get attacked. Or how close can I get to that buffalo? And they get stomped. I mean, or gored. I mean, it's just a whole host of things that are happening. I recently heard of an incident out of Canada where a guy was, he seemed to be yelling at a bear. And I guess he got fined for it because, a bear may see you as a challenge, and all of a sudden the bear may maul you. I mean, people forget these are wild animals, and if an animal feels threatened, they usually run, but sometimes they don't, right? So can you imagine this individual who is working with your trapped animal, and he's putting food in and trying to get it and trying to take selfies with it, and so this opens you up to liability. Is this going to be a situation where what happens if that person gets bit or scratched? What if it's a child? So how good is your liability insurance? Okay, so this is serious. Right? We call this, I'm not a lawyer, but it's called in legal terms, what's called an attractive nuisance. This is why you have to put a fence around your pool, right? It's called an attractive nuisance. And so, as I understand it, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand it, an attractive nuisance is something that a child or an individual would desire to experience that could potentially harm them, but it's unclear. But the danger is not immediately apparent. Okay, that would be an attractive nuisance. So if you have a pool, for instance, and it's a hot summer day, obviously people are wanting to get cool and they would want to swim in it. So a child or something like that would not understand that the pool is a threat to his or her life. The same way with your cage trap, right? I mean, you have I saw it on Wild Kingdom, or I saw it on National Geographic, or one of these vet shows where they were feeding animals and they're hand holding this raccoon, and it was so cute. I mean, you get the idea here. And so the person doesn't realize that what's being filmed are people that are professionals and understand. I mean, we all should remember the gentleman out of Australia who was doing all kinds of shows with animals, and he was chasing them around, and ultimately was doing some filming in the ocean, and he got killed by a stingray. The stingrays have these barbs in their tails, and while he was swimming with the stingray, and the stingray stabbed him and hit his heart. Now, stingrays are typically not that dangerous. But he's dead now. Right? So I'm not suggesting that people who are playing around with their cage traps are going to necessarily die. But if there is an infection, it could be. I mean, what about tetanus and rabies, of course? And there are other infections. The animal's peeing in the trap, and what if they get some sort of a disease into an open wound or something? You can let your mind play in any direction on this. So that's an attractive nuisance. So this is serious, and I hope I kind of get this idea that people bothering your traps is a real problem. So now that I've kind of laid this problem out for you, and I do hope you talk to your insurance agent and say, well, am I protected? You might need to find out. So how do we solve this problem or mitigate or reduce the potential risk that you have for this? Well, the first thing you need to have straight away is you need to have a good contract. You need to be, I have one that's available for people that purchase my book. I send it out. It's available for free to those individuals. I even posted it out elsewhere if you want to hunt for it. So it's basically a template. Now, obviously, that contract is a little dated at this point, but it gives you something to start with, and that will certainly save you time and money when it comes to getting your lawyer to update it for your particular state. And so that's what you're going to have to do, folks. I mean, there's contracts out there. I think National Wildlife Control Operators Associations, or Truth in Advertising. I'm still a board member of the National Wildlife Control Operators Association. I'm also a member of the National Wildlife Control Operators Association. So, but having a foundational contract helps your lawyer, as he's looking it over, to make tweaks with it to match the case law and issues in your particular state. Okay, so you need to be sure that's about as rock solid as you can get, because again, as you know, the law is only what a judge says it is, right? So I'm pretty negative on the law because, well, the law is just what a judge says it is. There's no more actual reading anymore. It's just sort of willy-nilly. The person with the most money wins. But hey, it is what it is. That's the reality of it. So you need to have a good contract. What do I mean by that? So you need to have in that contract that you have the right to stop working if your traps keep getting molested. I mean, I would probably give people one strike. That's what I did when I was in business. One strike. I mean, if I started getting more than that, it was a problem. And I would encourage you to have a fine element in this, because this is costing you money. So it means that for those of you who were charging a setup fee, that setup fee needs to be high enough that if your traps are being molested with, you're leaving. And you've made enough money to come back and not catch anything. So you need to be sure there's some punitive side. So you want that landowner, that property owner, the person hiring you, you want him or her very motivated to keep your equipment safe. Okay? The second thing you need to do, of course, is you need to evaluate the area. How vulnerable is your equipment in this particular area? So let me kind of give a straightaway principle here, and that is, whenever possible, always have your traps elevated. So some people may trap gray squirrels on the ground, but you shouldn't be doing that as a professional. Your traps should be elevated because, generally speaking, gray squirrels are always coming in around roof level. Are there exceptions? Probably. I mean, certainly red squirrels will come in at ground level. I am not aware of any instances where gray squirrels were coming in at low levels, but I'm sure some of you out there in podcast land may have an instance. So but as a general rule, and I think it's pretty secure here, that everyone knows that gray squirrels are coming in high. So why are you putting a trap in the ground? Very few people, are going to put a ladder up to go bother your trap. Okay, so that is just something that that's unlikely going to happen. Okay, so you got to make sure that trap is secure. Of course, you don't want it falling off the roof and killing somebody, right? So you need to be sure it's secure, but getting the trap off the ground. I used to create little shelves. We used an elbow bracket and put a sheet of plywood on it that was larger than the footprint of the trap that I was working with. And then I would screw the trap to the piece of plywood and then screw the plywood to the elbow bracket. And then I would screw the elbow bracket to the building itself. So sometimes a squirrel would climb the building, and I could then just put the trap on the elbow on this little shelf and catch him as he was climbing up. You'd see the trap, see the bait in there, and walk in and bang, get caught. But you'd have to have a ladder to get it, right? There is nothing better than that. Now, does it stop people from throwing rocks at it or getting a long pole? Probably not, but most people aren't going to be looking for it there, okay? And so it's pretty rare to have your trap molested at that level by a person, okay? So that's your first step. For those of you who have the trap on the ground, skunks and woodchucks per se, now it becomes a little bit more difficult. Now you're going to have to think about how much foot traffic am I dealing with this particular area? What's the proximity to the neighbors? So here's the rule of thumb for this, and that is, if you have to put something on the ground, out of sight is out of mind. So that's something you've got to make sure is, can this be viewed from the street? Can this be viewed from the sidewalk? Can this be viewed from the neighbor? A board, I used to have sheets of plywood with me, putting things behind a tree, putting things in the bushes, putting traps in the bushes, covering it with some leaves. There's a whole host of ways of making that trap difficult to see because, again, people don't pay attention. They really don't. So anything to break the outline of that trap or to make it so that people don't see it. I could put a trap inside of just take a trash can, lay the trash can on the side, stabilize the can so it doesn't roll around or anything, put the trap inside. People just see a trap that's been tipped. I mean, a trash can has been tipped over. No big deal. Ooh, out of sight, out of mind. Now, again, that does make it harder for your client to evaluate the trap, right? So you have to balance the need to avoid trap molestation and your client checking the trap if that's legal in your particular state. But an alternative way would be, and so a third option would be to have remote trap monitoring so that as soon as the trap is sprung, you're getting a notification. And that technology is really moving along, and I believe that the prices are coming down. I mean, it's kind of a balance between gas prices and the cost of the equipment. And so, but if you're in an area where there's a high risk of trap molestation or becoming an attractive nuisance or something like that, there's certainly value in using those trap monitoring devices in those high-risk areas so that you can at least know faster that something's happened, get to that scene before people discover that there's a trapped animal in there. A fourth option for you, and this is less about stopping the problem as much as punishing the problem, and that is the use of trail cameras or Wi-Fi type cameras to monitor your equipment to catch the person who is molesting your traps. Many states have laws against the molestation or disturbance of traps that have been legally set. Now, hey, look, I understand that those laws are not really enforced that well, okay? However, there are instances where you can get that enforced if you raise enough stink, if you have a rock-solid case. Typically, when I was doing one job, I was removing some animals out of a factory. And the factory people, the employees, liked the animals that were there and were feeding them. So there was a problem there because the managers and the owners wanted the animals gone, but the workers liked to have them around. But, here's the thing. If the workers got bit or scratched, guess who was getting sued, right? I mean, the owner. So it's sort of like the owner owner and managers were in a tough spot. So if you have, cameras showing that XYZ worker was molesting your equipment, now the owner of the company, the manager, can institute punitive action against that worker, right? So now so it's not always just a game warden that can help you here. You also have the ability to employ the power of the owner of the company in terms of employment. So those are some things that you'd want to consider in terms of leverage. And that once you have a worker that's being punished, typically things are going to sort of straighten out after that. Maybe some true believers in your place, but that word will travel fast that so-and-so's been suspended for a while without pay until the job is over, right? That word will get out in short order. So why don't we summarize again where we're at? Molestation of your equipment by people puts you at liability risk. It also costs you money, and it makes things more difficult for your client because it takes longer to do the job and get it done. And you may educate an animal if they're releasing it. So how do you solve that? One, you want to be sure you have a rock-solid contract that can have punitive damages, or you can stop working at the job if you can't have your equipment unmolested. Secondly, you want to make sure to put the traps either out of reach or out of sight. Okay. Definitely try to do that. Out of reach or out of sight. And then lastly, thirdly, can you use some monitoring equipment, whether it be trap monitors to tell you whether the trap's been fired or not, or you can also have trail cameras as sort of an after-the-fact issue where you can then catch the person who's been molesting your traps and try to use either legal punitive measures like through the game warden or the power of a landlord or the power of an employer who can then put pressure to bear on the people who are causing your traps harm and releasing animals or disturbing animals or this sort of thing. I do encourage you to contact your insurance agent and say, hey, what happens if someone is like feeding an animal and gets bit? This area of law is really kind of new, right? The pest control industry has a lot more experience with lawsuits than the wildlife control industry, and so I'm anticipating perhaps, and I'm kind of surprised it hasn't happened more, to be quite frank about it. So maybe I was just too early. But as the industry gets more and more involved in this, particularly people who don't have long-term experience in animal handling, then I'm expecting more potential lawsuits to emerge, and so some of this law will become more clear over time, but not at the cut. But a lot of people are going to pay the price in the short term because as this gets worked out, because they didn't think carefully enough about some of the risks of leaving equipment on that property. So I do hope this has helped you think deeply about trap molestation. Let me add one more thing. I do suggest using, I like to paint my cage traps. Use a flat paint, not something that's glossy. So I used to use flat black paint because that lets it be in the shadows. You may try more camo. It kind of depends on your particular environment. But it not only helps your traps last a little longer, but it also tries to get rid of that shine because people are attracted to a flash of light. So anything that try to do that. Thanks for listening. Again, I'm Stephen Van Tassel, Wildlife Control Consultant. Another episode of Living the Wildlife. Love to hear from you. Again, my email is wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from your ideas, your feedback. Back to you, Frank.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.